The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but Arthur Brennan didn't notice. He sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak table where he had eaten breakfast with Sarah for 43 years, and stared at the envelope in his hands. White official with the First National Bank logo embossed in blue. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it said. Foreclosure. Final notice. April 15th, 2025. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily each second, a hammer blow counting down to the end of everything. Outside the kitchen window, December snow fell in lazy spirals across the Montana landscape, covering his fields in white silence. Beautiful and merciless the way winter always was in the high country. Arthur's hands trembled slightly as he set the envelope down. Not from fear at 80 years old, he'd buried fear somewhere in the frozen mud of Korea 70 years ago. No, this was exhaustion, bone-deep weariness that came from fighting a war you knew you'd already lost. His eyes drifted to the wall where Sarah smiled at him from their wedding photo. June 1968. She wore a simple white dress, flowers in her dark hair, and that smile that could light up a room. He'd been 22, fresh back from the war, still lean and strong. They'd bought this farm with his GI Bill money and Sarah's savings from working at the diner. 200 acres of Montana heaven, they'd called it. Now it was just 200 acres of debt. The medical bills sat in a shoebox on the counter. Arthur didn't look at them anymore. He'd memorized every number months ago. Chemotherapy, $45,000 per cycle, 6 cycles. Radiation, $60,000. Hospice care, $30,000. Experimental treatments that didn't work, another $100,000. The numbers blurred together into an impossible mountain of paper and ink that translated to one simple truth: he'd sold everything trying to save her, and she died anyway. The cattle went first, then the equipment, the tractor, the combines, everything except the old Ford truck that barely ran. He'd kept Rosie, the last pig, because selling her would have brought maybe $200, and somehow that felt like surrender. So Rosie lived in the barn and Arthur lived in the house, and together they waited for spring to bring the bulldozers. Arthur stood slowly, his knees protesting, and walked to the window. The snow was picking up fat flakes now instead of lazy spirals. The Weather Service had been chattering about a storm system moving in from Canada, but they had been wrong before. Still, something in the air felt different, colder, heavier. He pulled on his coat, the same Carhartt jacket Sarah had bought him 15 years ago, frayed at the cuffs, but still warm, and headed out to check on Rosie. The wind hit him like a fist the moment he opened the door. Not the lazy December wind he'd expected, but something vicious and alive. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning. The thermometer on the porch read -15 and falling fast. Arthur's breath crystallized instantly. Ice formed in his beard. This wasn't the gentle storm the weatherman had promised. This was a killer. He grabbed the rope tied to the porch post, the lifeline his grandfather had installed back in 1952, and followed it hand over hand toward the barn. The wind screamed in his ears, trying to tear him away, send him tumbling into the white void. Visibility was maybe 3 feet. The barn, only 100 yards away, had vanished completely. His fingers, even through thick gloves, began to go numb. Each breath burned his lungs. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was aggressive, searching for any gap in his clothing, any exposed skin, trying to kill him. He made it to the barn and stumbled inside, gasping. Rosie snorted from her pen, unimpressed by the apocalypse outside. Arthur checked her water-spread fresh hay and was about to head back when he heard it. Engines. At first he thought he was imagining it. What fool would be riding motorcycles in this weather? But the sound grew louder, closer. Multiple engines, all of them struggling, all of them dying. Arthur pushed the barn door open a crack and peered out into the whiteout. Through the swirling snow he saw lights. Headlights weaving, wobbling, coming up his long driveway. One by one they winked out. He heard crashes, metal hitting snow-covered earth, men shouting, cursing, then silence swallowed by the storm's roar. Arthur stood in the doorway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew what rode motorcycles in groups like that. He'd seen them at the truck stop in Redemption. leather in patches and hard faces. The Iron Brotherhood, the most feared motorcycle club in 3 states. Outlaws, criminals, dangerous men, and they were dying in his driveway. Every sensible instinct told Arthur to close the barn door, get back to the house, pretend he'd seen nothing. The sheriff would find them in the morning, if they survived until morning, which they wouldn't. Not in minus 30 degrees with 60-mile-per-hour winds. He thought of Sarah. What would she say? He already knew. Sarah had never turned away anyone in need. She'd fed drifters during hard times, nursed injured hikers who got lost in the hills, even taken in a runaway teenager for a week until her parents came looking. We're all God's children, she'd always said. Even the lost ones. Especially the lost ones. Damn it, Sarah Arthur muttered, his breath frosting in the air. He grabbed the emergency lantern from the barn wall and ventured back into the storm. The cold was beyond anything he'd experienced. It didn't just chill, it attacked, a physical force trying to stop his heart, freeze his lungs mid-breath. Arthur could only see a few feet ahead, the lantern's light swallowed by swirling white. He found the first one at the end of the driveway. A massive man, easily 6'6", lay sprawled beside his toppled motorcycle. His leather jacket was covered in patches and road dirt, his face already turning blue beneath a thick beard. Arthur knelt beside him, checking for a pulse with shaking fingers. Still alive. Barely. "Hey!" Arthur shouted over the wind. "Can you hear me?" No response. The man's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and irregular. Arthur looked at the man's size, then at his own 80-year-old frame. No way he could carry him. He'd have to drag him. He grabbed the man under the arms and pulled. It was like trying to drag a refrigerator through mud. His back screamed in protest, his knees threatening to buckle, but Arthur gritted his teeth and pulled harder. 1 foot, 2 feet. The barn was 100 yards away. It might as well have been 100 miles. He pulled anyway. The journey took 20 minutes. By the time Arthur dragged the first man into the barn, his lungs burned like he'd swallowed fire. His muscles trembled. His vision swam with dark spots. But he got the man inside, covered him with horse blankets, and then turned back to the door. There were more out there. He'd heard multiple crashes. Arthur went back into the storm. He found them scattered along the driveway like fallen soldiers. Some had crawled a few feet before collapsing. Others lay where they'd fallen, their motorcycles on top of them, or beside them, already being buried by snow. One by one, Arthur dragged them to the barn. A lean man with a scarred face and intelligent eyes. A younger one, maybe 25, with tattoos covering his neck. A stocky rider with a broken nose and split lip from his crash. Each one was a battle against the cold, against his failing body, against time itself. His heart was doing things it probably shouldn't at his age. His back felt like someone had driven railroad spikes into his spine. Twice he fell, and twice he got back up because stopping meant dying, and he was too stubborn to die. The last one was different. He lay at the very end of the driveway near the county road, his motorcycle on top of him, pinning him down. Even unconscious, even dying, there was something commanding about him. His face was weathered and scarred with a gray beard and eyes that even closed seemed dangerous. This had to be their leader. Arthur pushed the motorcycle off him, nearly threw his back out, doing it, and checked for injuries. Broken leg, definitely. Possibly broken ribs. But still breathing, however shallowly. "Come on, son," Arthur grunted, grabbing him under the arms. "Dying ain't allowed on my property." By the time Arthur dragged the last man into the barn, he couldn't feel his fingers or toes. His heart hammered erratically. His vision kept graying out at the edges. But all 19 men were inside, out of the wind, out of the killing cold. He counted them twice to be sure. 19. Every single one. Arthur stumbled to the old kerosene heater, the one Sarah had always complained used too much fuel, and fired it up. He set it in the middle of the barn and turned it to maximum. The temperature began to rise slowly, degree by precious degree, fighting back against the cold that had seeped into everything. Then Arthur collapsed onto a hay bale, gasping for air, his entire body shaking so violently he could barely hold himself upright. His coat was frozen stiff. Ice had formed in his beard and eyebrows. His lungs felt shredded. He'd just saved 19 members of the most dangerous motorcycle club in Montana. Sarah would have been proud. Or she'd have called him an idiot. Probably both. Arthur pulled his shotgun from where he'd left it by the door and laid it across his lap, just in case they woke up feeling ungrateful. Then he sat watching them, these 19 strangers dressed in leather and chains, as their blue lips slowly turned pink again, as their frozen limbs began to thaw. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the barn, 19 men began to breathe a little easier. And Arthur Brennan, 80 years old and 4 months from losing everything, allowed himself a small smile. At least he'd die knowing he'd done something that mattered. The first one to wake was the giant Arthur had dragged in first. His eyes snapped open like a predator sensing danger. His hand immediately went to his belt, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. He sat up fast, then groaned and clutched his head, his face twisting in pain. "Easy there, son," Arthur said from his hay bale, not moving the shotgun. "You've got hypothermia and probably a concussion. Moving too quick will just make you puke." The giant's eyes found Arthur, then scanned the barn, rapidly taking in the other bodies laid out on the floor, the kerosene heater glowing orange, the horse blankets covering everyone, where his voice came out as a croak. "Where am I, my barn?" About 15 miles outside of Redemption, Montana. The others, the giant tried to stand, swayed dangerously and sat back down hard. "Are they all 19 of you? Live? Though I can't promise for how long if that storm doesn't break." Another man stirred, then another. Within 10 minutes, most of them were conscious, though all of them looked like they'd been through a war. They sat up slowly, looking around with the weary eyes of men who'd woken up in stranger places, but never quite like this. One of them, the lean man with the scarred face, crawled over to the unconscious leader. He checked his pulse, examined his leg with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Doc the giant asked, his voice tight with worry. "He's stable," the scarred man said. "Legs broken clean, ribs probably fractured, but he'll live." He looked at Arthur with sharp, assessing eyes. "You do this. Get us all inside." Arthur nodded. The bikers exchanged glances. Something passed between them. Surprise, respect, confusion. The giant spoke first. "Old man, do you have any idea who we are? Based on the patches, I'd say you're the Iron Brotherhood. Based on the newspapers, I'd say you're trouble. Based on the fact that you were freezing to death in my driveway, I'd say you're human beings who needed help." A younger biker, couldn't have been more than 25, with fresh tattoos still healing on his neck, laughed, though it came out harsh. "You helped us. We could rob you blind. We could kill you." Arthur's expression didn't change. "You could try. But I'm 80 years old, son. I fought in Korea, buried my wife last year, and the bank's taking this farm in the spring. You want to kill me? You'd be doing me a favor. But if you want to rob me, I've got about $40 in the house and a pig named Rosie. Help yourself." The young biker's grin faded. The barn fell silent except for the wind howling outside and the kerosene heater's steady hiss. The scarred man, Doc, studied Arthur with new interest. "Korea, which unit Marines?" "First Division, Chosen Reservoir." Several of the bikers straightened. Even outlaws respected the frozen chosen. "What's your name, old man?" Doc asked quietly. "Arthur Brennan?" "Well, Arthur Brennan, I'm Doc Miller. That big fellow is Garrett Morrison. We call him Tank. And the man with the broken leg," he gestured to the still unconscious leader, "is Cole Davison. We call him Reaper. He's our president. Pleased to meet you even under the circumstances." Doc looked around the barn again, taking in the details. The neatly stacked hay bales, the clean stalls, the old tools hanging on walls. "You got us all in here by yourself." "Wasn't much choice. Couldn't leave you out there." Tank laughed, a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from his boots. 19 men, some of us weigh over 250, and you dragged us all in, one at a time. Arthur shrugged. Took a while. Old man Tank said, shaking his head slowly, "You're either the bravest or the stupidest person I've ever met. At my age, there's not much difference." The president, Cole Reaper Davidson, groaned and opened his eyes. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on Arthur immediately with an intensity that would have made most men uncomfortable. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, commanding, even in pain. "Arthur Brennan, you're in my barn." "Why?" "Because you were dying in my driveway, and my wife would have haunted me if I'd left you there." Cole tried to sit up, saw his splinted leg, and cursed with creative proficiency. Doc moved to his side quickly. "Easy, Prez. Clean break. You'll heal, but you're not riding for a while. The storm's still raging. We're stuck here until it breaks." Cole looked at Arthur again, his gray eyes calculating, measuring. "You know who we are. I can read patches, and you still helped us. Like I told your boys, you were just cold men in need. I'm just an old man with a barn." Cole studied him for a long moment. The barn was quiet except for the wind and the heater. Then Cole did something Arthur didn't expect. He smiled. It transformed his hard face, made him look almost kind. "Arthur Brennan," Cole said slowly, "we owe you a debt. You don't owe me anything. Just try not to die in my barn." The smell would upset Rosie. "Rosie, my pig." Tank laughed again, louder this time. "I like this old man, Prez." "So do I," Cole said softly, still studying Arthur with those storm cloud eyes. "So do I." The blizzard raged for another 8 hours. The barn became a strange sanctuary filled with the smell of leather motor oil and kerosene heat. The bikers, once they'd warmed up and assessed their injuries, broken bones, frostbite bruises, but nothing fatal, began to relax slightly. Arthur watched them with the detached interest of someone who'd lived long enough to see all types. They were dangerous, yes. Hard men who'd lived hard lives, but they were also surprisingly organized, almost disciplined. They deferred to Cole without question, took care of their injured without complaint. When one of the younger ones started to whine about the cold, Tank shut him down with a single look. Around what Arthur guessed was noon. Hard to tell time in the whiteout, he stood up slowly, his muscles protesting. "I'm going to the house to make food. You boys hungry?" The question was met with immediate enthusiastic agreement. "What have you got?" One of them asked. "Whatever I can carry back." "Storm like this, I'm not making multiple trips." Tank stood up, towering over Arthur by at least a foot. "I'll help. You can barely walk. I can walk better than you can carry food for 20 men. Arthur couldn't argue with that logic. Together they made the rope-guided journey to the house. The storm had intensified, if that was possible. The wind was a physical presence, trying to rip them off their feet, trying to tear them away into the white nothing. But they made it stumbling into Arthur's kitchen like drowning men reaching shore. The house was cold. The wood stove in the living room couldn't heat the whole place, but it was shelter from the killing wind outside. Tank looked around, slowly taking in the simple furniture, the photographs on the walls, the old-fashioned kitchen with its worn linoleum floors and ancient appliances. His eyes lingered on the wedding photo, Arthur and Sarah, young and hopeful. "You live here alone?" he asked quietly. "Since Sarah passed. Year ago last month. I'm sorry." Arthur nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. He turned to the pantry and started pulling out jars. Pickles he'd put up 2 summers ago, canned tomatoes from Sarah's last garden, green beans, potatoes from the root cellar, smaller than they should be, but still good. He'd slaughtered a pig in the fall, and Sarah's sister had helped him smoke and preserve the meat. There was ham in the cold pantry bacon wrapped in butcher paper. "This everything?" Tank asked, his voice carefully neutral. "This is my winter stores. Was planning to make it last until spring, but Arthur shrugged. Plans change." Tank was quiet for a moment, his massive frame filling the small kitchen. "You're giving us your food, your heat, your winter supplies." He paused. "You're losing the farm anyway, aren't you?" Arthur looked at him sharply. "How'd you saw the foreclosure notice on your table?" "First National Bank, April 15th, Tank's voice was gentle. You're already down to nothing and you're still helping us. What else would I do? Tank didn't have an answer for that. They loaded everything into boxes, all of Arthur's carefully rationed winter food, the supplies he'd been stretching to last 4 more months. Tank carried most of it, his strength returning as he warmed up, and they made the treacherous trip back to the barn. Arthur fired up his old camping stove, the one he and Sarah had used on their honeymoon, back when Eisenhower was president. The stove still worked perfectly. They didn't make things like they used to. He made what his mother had called depression stew. Potatoes, ham, canned tomatoes, green beans, and whatever spices he could find, all thrown into his largest pot. The smell filled the barn almost immediately, rich and savory, and he heard stomachs rumbling all around him. While the stew cooked, he fried up bacon in his cast iron skillet and made biscuits in his Dutch oven, the way Sarah had taught him. The bikers watched in fascination as this 80-year-old man worked with the efficiency of a professional cook, never wasting a motion, never spilling a drop. When it was ready, Arthur served it in every bowl, cup, and container he'd brought from the house. The bikers ate like starving wolves, groaning with pleasure at the first hot food they'd had in who knew how long. "This is amazing," one of them said through a mouthful of biscuit, his eyes closed in appreciation. "This is basic country cooking," Arthur replied, ladling out more stew. "If you think this is good, you should have tasted Sarah's Sunday pot roast." "Tell us about her," Doc said quietly from his spot near Cole. Arthur hesitated. He hadn't talked about Sarah, really talked about her since the funeral. The folks in Redemption had offered condolences, awkward and well-meaning, but no one had asked him to remember her, to celebrate her. So he did. He told them about meeting her at a county fair in 1968. She'd been working the pie booth, and he'd been fresh back from Korea trying to figure out what normal life looked like. She'd beaten him at the ring toss and then asked him to buy her a lemonade. Their first date was a movie bullet with Steve McQueen, and she'd held his hand during the car chase scene. He told them about their wedding in the spring of 1969, a small ceremony at the Methodist church with maybe 30 people, about how they'd bought this farm with his GI Bill money and her savings from working at the diner, about how she couldn't have children, how it had broken her heart for years, but how she'd poured all that love into the farm, into the community, into him. He told them about her laugh, which could fill a room and make everyone else start laughing too, about her stubbornness, which matched his own and led to epic arguments that always ended with one of them, usually him, apologizing, about how she'd held his hand during his own health scares over the years, never once complaining about the bills that were piling up, never once suggesting he wasn't worth it. And he told them about the end, about the cancer that came quick and mean, discovered too late to do anything but fight, about how he'd sold everything they owned, the cattle, the equipment, everything but the farm itself, to pay for treatments that didn't work, about holding her hand as she slipped away, about her last words, "You take care of this place, Arthur. It's your home." About the silence that filled the house after so profound it was like a physical weight. When he finished, the barn was quiet except for the wind outside, which had finally started to ease. Cole spoke first, his voice rough. "You gave everything for her. She was everything. And now the bank's taking the farm." Arthur nodded. "Medical debt. They said I could file bankruptcy, start over, but Sarah and I, we believed in paying our debts. So I let them start foreclosure proceedings. In the spring, when the ground thaws, they'll bring in the bulldozers. Some developer from Helena wants to build a resort." "That's not right," Tank said, his voice hard. "That's the law," Arthur replied. "I made my choices. I'd make them again." The bikers looked at each other. Something passed between them, an unspoken communication that Arthur didn't quite understand. Cole was the one who spoke. "Arthur, you gave us your heat, your food, your winter stores. You dragged 19 strangers out of a blizzard knowing who we were, knowing we're dangerous. You know what that means to us? I did what anyone should do. But most people wouldn't. Most people would have called the cops and let us freeze. Hell, most people would have been too scared to even open their door. I'm too old to be scared of much anymore." That, Cole said, his gray eyes intense, "is exactly why we owe you a debt. And the Iron Brotherhood always pays its debts." Arthur started to protest, but Cole held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you, when you need us, we'll be there. I don't need. When you need us, Cole repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. You call, promise me. Arthur looked around at the 19 men, all of them watching him. He saw respect in their eyes, gratitude, and something else, a fierce loyalty that he didn't quite understand but couldn't deny. All right, he said finally. If I need you, I'll call. Cole smiled. Good. The storm broke just before dawn. Arthur woke. He dozed off on the hay bale, his shotgun still across his lap, to silence. Real silence, the first in almost 24 hours. He pushed open the barn door and stepped into a transformed world. Everything was white. The farm, the fields, the distant mountains, all of it buried under 3 feet of fresh snow. The sun was just rising, turning the snow pink and gold, making the whole world look like it had been dipped in honey and rose petals. For a moment, Arthur forgot about the foreclosure, forgot about the debts and the loneliness and the slow dying of everything he'd built. He just stood there watching the sun rise over Montana and remembered why he'd fallen in love with this place. Quite a sight, Cole said from behind him. He'd hobbled over on a makeshift crutch, his broken leg wrapped tight in the splint Doc had fashioned from barnwood and rope. Montana morning, Arthur said. Sarah used to love mornings like this. She dragged me out of bed just to watch the sunrise. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the snow. The bikers spent the next few hours digging out their motorcycles, checking engines, making repairs. To Arthur's surprise, they knew their machines inside and out. These weren't just riders, they were mechanics engineers. Even the younger ones worked with practiced efficiency, their hands sure and steady despite the cold. Tank had his bike running within an hour, the engine roaring to life like it was happy to be awake. Doc showed the others how to clear ice from carburetors, how to check for damage from the cold. Before they left, they did something Arthur didn't expect. They cleared his driveway. All of them, even Cole with his broken leg propped up on Tank's bike, worked together to shovel a path from the barn to the house to the county road. It took hours. The sun was high by the time they finished, and Arthur's driveway looked better than it had in years. You didn't have to do that, Arthur said, watching them work. Yes, we did, Tank replied, not stopping his shoveling. When they were finally ready to leave, Cole was the last to approach. He had ridden in the sidecar of Doc's bike, his broken legs sticking out awkwardly wrapped in blankets. Before Doc started the engine, Cole handed Arthur something. A burner phone. One number in there, Cole said, mine. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call, day or night. You understand? I understand. But I won't need. Promise me you'll keep it. Promise me you'll call if you need us. Arthur looked at the cheap phone, then at Cole's earnest face. I promise. Good. Cole extended his hand. Arthur shook it, surprised by the strength in the man's grip despite his injuries. We pay our debts, Arthur. Remember that? Then they were gone. 19 motorcycles roaring to life, heading back down the county road, in a line, their engines echoing off the snow-covered hills. Arthur watched until they disappeared over the horizon, the sound fading into memory. He looked at the phone in his hand, then slipped it into his pocket. He didn't expect to ever use it. He was wrong. Winter passed slowly each day, blending into the next. Arthur fell into his routines, feeding Rosie, keeping the wood stove burning, rationing his depleted food stores. The pantry that had been full in November was nearly empty by February. He'd given the bikers almost everything, and while he didn't regret it, hunger was a constant companion now. He lost weight, 25 pounds, maybe more. His clothes hung loose on his frame. Sometimes when he looked in the mirror, he saw his father's face staring back, the same gaunt cheeks, the same hollow eyes that had marked his father's final years during the Dust Bowl. But he kept going, kept waking up, kept tending the farm even though it wouldn't be his much longer. The letters started coming in March. First from First National Bank, formal notices about the foreclosure sale scheduled for April 15th. Then from Marcus Caldwell, the developer, Slick, glossy letters on expensive paper offering to buy the farm as is for a pittance, maybe 10 cents on the dollar of what it was worth. Arthur threw those letters in the wood stove. They burned well. Then Caldwell himself showed up. It was a cold Tuesday morning when the black Mercedes S-Class pulled into the driveway. Arthur was on the porch rocking slowly in his chair, watching the last patches of snow melt in the strengthening spring sun. He didn't stand when Marcus Caldwell got out of the car. Caldwell was everything Arthur wasn't. Young, maybe 45. Rich, the suit he wore probably cost more than Arthur had made in a year of farming. Smooth, his shoes were polished to a mirror. Shine, his hair perfectly styled, his smile white and perfect and completely empty. Mr. Brennan Caldwell said, climbing the porch steps without being invited. I'm Marcus Caldwell. I believe you have received my letters. Receive them. Use them to start fires. They burn well. Caldwell's mouth song tightened slightly, the first crack in his polished facade. Mr. Brennan, I'm trying to help you here. This foreclosure is going to happen whether you like it or not. But if you sell to me now, you walk away with something. If you wait for the auction, you get nothing. The bank gets it all. The bank can have it. Don't be foolish. Take my offer. It's more than generous considering the state of this place. Arthur looked at Caldwell, really looked at him. He saw the contempt hiding behind the smile, the calculation in his eyes. This man saw the farm as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet, a profit margin to be exploited. He didn't see the history, the love of the life that had been lived here. Get off my porch, Arthur said quietly. Excuse me, I said, get off my porch. This is still my property until April 15th. Until then, you're trespassing. Caldwell's mask slipped for just a moment, showing the anger beneath hot and ugly. You're making a mistake, old man. I'm offering you a way out, a chance to leave with dignity. I have my dignity. It's the one thing you can't buy or foreclose on. Now get out before I get my shotgun. For a long moment, they stared at each other. The old farmer and the developer separated by more than just years. Then Caldwell smiled again, though it didn't reach his eyes. Have it your way. But on April 15th, I'll be back with the sheriff in a bulldozer, and there won't be anything you can do about it. He walked back to his Mercedes, got in, and drove away, leaving deep ruts in Arthur's muddy driveway. Arthur sat on the porch long after he had left, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from rage, from the helplessness of knowing Caldwell was right. On April 15th, it would all be over. That night, he took out the burner phone Cole had given him. He turned it on for the first time since December. The battery was still at 70% good quality despite being cheap. He looked at the single number saved in the contacts. His thumb hovered over the call button. He almost pressed it. Almost. But pride stopped him. These were his problems, his debts, his failures. He'd made his choices. He couldn't ask others to fight his battles, especially not a motorcycle club that had their own troubles. He turned the phone off and put it back in the drawer, but he didn't throw it away. The days marched toward April 15th with inexorable momentum. Arthur prepared himself as best he could. He cleaned the house, not that there was much to clean. He organized his few possessions. He wrote a simple will, leaving everything to the local Methodist church. Not that there was much to leave. On April 14th, he sat on the porch and watched the sunset. Tomorrow would bring the end of everything. The bank, the Sheriff Caldwell with his bulldozers and his empty smile. Arthur wasn't afraid. He'd faced death before in the frozen hills of Korea, in the hospital rooms where Sarah had fought and lost. Death was familiar, almost comfortable. But losing the farm felt different. This wasn't just losing property. This was losing the last piece of Sarah, the last testament to their life together. He sat there until the stars came out, until the temperature dropped and his breath frosted in the air. Then he went inside, climbed into the bed he'd shared with Sarah for 43 years, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. And when it did, Arthur Brennan would face it the way he'd faced everything else in his 80 years, with his back straight and his eyes open, even if it killed him. April 15th dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Montana famous. The sky stretched endless and blue, unmarred by clouds, and the morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. It was the kind of morning that promised hope, new beginnings, fresh starts. Arthur Brennan knew better. He'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep, watching the darkness give way to gray and then to light. Now he stood in front of the bathroom mirror, carefully shaving with the straight razor that had been his father's. His hands were steady. Whatever else happened today, he'd meet it with dignity. He dressed in his Sunday suit, the same black suit he had worn to Sarah's funeral, cleaned and pressed with care. White shirt, bolo tie with the turquoise clasp Sarah had given him on their 20th anniversary. His good boots polished until they shone. If this was the end, he'd meet it properly dressed. He made coffee, the last of the good beans, and scrambled the final 2 eggs from his neighbor's chickens. He'd sold his own hens last week. Everything had to go eventually. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching the sun climb higher through the kitchen window. The clock ticked steadily toward 10 o'clock, the appointed time. At 9:30, he loaded his shotgun and walked out to the porch. He settled into his rocking chair, the gun across his lap, and waited. They arrived precisely at 10. First came Sheriff Jackson Warren's patrol car rolling up the driveway at careful speed. The sheriff got out slowly, looking uncomfortable in his pressed uniform. He'd known Arthur for 30 years, had eaten Sarah's cooking at church potlucks, had borrowed Arthur's tractor more than once. Now he was here to evict him. Behind the sheriff came the black Mercedes, polished and gleaming. Marcus Caldwell emerged looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine, tailored suit, designer sunglasses, that empty smile firmly in place. Then came the machinery, a flatbed truck carrying a yellow bulldozer, 2 more trucks with security personnel, 6 large men in sunglasses who were clearly hired muscle pretending to be legitimate contractors. And at the back, almost as an afterthought, a white van with a local TV station's logo. Caldwell had invited the press. He wanted witnesses to his victory. Arthur didn't move from his rocking chair. Caldwell climbed in the porch steps first, waving a sheaf of papers like they were a trophy. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan." His voice was loud, pitched for the cameras. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Arthur said nothing. "I have the final foreclosure order right here." Caldwell held up the papers. Signed by Judge Patricia Morrison herself. As of 8 a.m. this morning, this property belongs to First National Bank, which has sold it to Sterling Development LLC, my company, which means legally speaking, you are now trespassing. "This is my home," Arthur said quietly. "Was your home. Past tense, now it's mine." Caldwell's smile widened. "Sheriff Warren is here to ensure a peaceful transition. So are you going to leave peacefully, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Sheriff Warren stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Arthur, I don't want any trouble. You know me. I don't want to arrest you, but the law is the law." "The law," Arthur said, still not moving, "is whatever people like him pay it to be." "That's a serious accusation," Caldwell said, his voice hardening slightly. "Sheriff, I think we've been patient enough. If Mr. Brennan won't leave, voluntarily remove him." Warren's hand moved toward his holster. "Arthur, please don't make me—" "You'll have to shoot me," Arthur said calmly, "because I'm not leaving. I was born in this house. Sarah died in this house. If you want it, you'll have to bury me in it." Caldwell's smile vanished, entirely replaced by something cold and ugly. "You stubborn old fool. You think anyone cares? You think anyone is coming to save you?" He gestured at the empty fields, the quiet morning. "Look around. There's no one here but you. No family, no friends. You're all alone, and you've always been alone. That's why you're losing everything. Because you don't matter. You never mattered." The words hit harder than Arthur expected, because part of him, the tired, grieving part that had been alone for a year, believed them. Sheriff Warren's hand was on his holster, now his deputies getting out of their cars, hands on their weapons. "Arthur, I'm going to count to 3. If you don't stand up and walk away, I'm going to have to—" Arthur's phone rang. Not the burner phone. His regular cell phone, the one he'd managed to keep active with the last of his money. He pulled it from his pocket, saw an unfamiliar number, and answered. Hello, Arthur. Cole Davidson's voice was steady calm, like they were discussing the weather. How you doing? Arthur glanced at Caldwell, at the sheriff, at the bulldozer waiting to tear down his home. Been better. That developer there yet? He's standing on my porch. Good. Tell him we're 3 minutes out. Arthur's heart skipped. Cole, you don't have to. We pay our debts, Arthur. Always have. Always will. 3 minutes. Hold on. The line went dead. Caldwell smirked. Another goodbye call. How touching. Sheriff, I've had enough of this theater. If he won't move, drag him off. The sheriff stepped forward reluctantly, his deputies flanking him, hands on their weapons. Then the ground started to vibrate. It was subtle at first, easy to miss, but the coffee in the sheriff's cup began to ripple. The windows of the farmhouse rattled slightly. Birds exploded from the trees, flying away in a panic. Sheriff Warren froze. What the... The vibration became a rumble. The rumble became a roar. Caldwell turned toward the county road, his face confused. Is that thunder? No, Arthur said quietly, standing up for the first time. That's my family. The eastern horizon turned black. They came over the rise like an avalanche of steel and chrome. Not 20 motorcycles, but hundreds. The Iron Brotherhood had returned, and they'd brought every chapter, every affiliate, every friend they had. The machine stretched as far as the eye could see, a river of motorcycles flowing toward the farm. The roar was deafening, a physical force that shook the ground like an earthquake. The sheer number of them was overwhelming, impossible. Caldwell's face went white. This can't be. The motorcycles poured into Arthur's property, surrounding it in a living wall of leather and steel. They didn't stop at the driveway. They drove across the fields, parked in the yard, lined the fence lines. Within minutes, the farm was surrounded by at least 400 bikers. All of them sitting on their machines, engines idling, staring at Caldwell and the sheriff with expressions that promised violence. Cole dismounted from his bike, his leg fully healed now, and walked through the sea of motorcycles toward the porch. The crowd parted for him like water. Behind him came Tank Doc and dozens of others Arthur recognized from the barn, but also hundreds he didn't, all wearing different patches, different colors, united by one thing: debt. Cole climbed the porch steps slowly, deliberately. He didn't look at Caldwell or the sheriff. He looked at Arthur. You called, Cole said simply. You came, Arthur replied, his voice thick with emotion. We'll always come. Cole turned to Caldwell. You're on our friend's property. Leave. Caldwell found his voice, though it came out shaky. This is bank property now. I have the legal documents. I have the law on my side. You have 30 seconds, Cole interrupted. Then my brothers start removing you, and we won't be gentle. 400 engines revved in unison, a sound like the end of the world. Sheriff Warren held up his hands. Now let's all just calm down, Miller. Cole's voice cut through the noise. The sheriff's first name spoken with quiet authority. You're a good man, I know that, but you're also on the wrong side of this. Step away. This doesn't concern you anymore. The sheriff looked at Arthur, at the 400 bikers, at Caldwell's pale face. Arthur could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. 30 years of knowing Arthur Brennan, of knowing he was a good man being crushed by an unjust system, versus one developer from Helena with too much money and not enough conscience. Warren made his decision. He took 3 steps back and folded his arms. I'm not seeing any crime being committed here, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. Just some folks having a conversation on private property. Sheriff Caldwell's voice cracked. You can't. You're supposed to. 20 seconds, Cole said. Tank cracked his knuckles. The sound was like gunshots. Caldwell backed up, nearly tripping over his own feet. This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll have you all arrested for 10 seconds. The bikers dismounted. 400 leather-clad men and women started walking toward the porch in perfect synchronization, their boots hitting the ground in a rhythm that sounded like a war drum. Caldwell ran. He practically dove into his Mercedes, screaming at his security guards to get in their trucks. They didn't argue. Within 30 seconds, Caldwell's entire convoy was fleeing down the driveway, the bulldozer operator abandoning his machine in his haste to escape. The bikers didn't chase them. They just watched engines rumbling as Caldwell's black Mercedes disappeared in a cloud of dust. Then Cole turned back to Arthur. Now he said about that foreclosure. Doc stepped forward carrying a duffel bag that looked heavy. He climbed onto the porch and unzipped it. It was full of cash. Stacks and stacks of bills, all neatly banded. $287,000, Doc said. Exact amount of your debt, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus enough extra to cover property taxes for the next 5 years. Arthur stared at the money, unable to process what he was seeing. I can't accept this. You're not accepting it, Cole said firmly. We're paying a debt. You saved 19 lives in a blizzard. This is what 19 lives are worth to us. You don't owe me? Yes, we do. Cole's voice was firm but not unkind. Arthur, in our world, debt is everything. Honor is everything. You gave us warmth when we were freezing food, when we were starving shelter, when we had none. You risked your life, your safety, your dwindling resources for strangers, for outlaws, for men the whole world fears. Tank stepped forward, his massive frame blocking out the sun. You know what the crazy thing is? You're the first person in maybe 20 years who looked at us and saw human beings instead of monsters. You didn't call the cops. You didn't lock your door. You came out into a blizzard and pulled us to safety one at a time. Another biker added, at 80 years old, you dragged Tank's 290-pound behind 100 yards through snow. My own father wouldn't have done that. So this isn't charity, Cole continued. This is payment. This is us honoring a debt. And if you refuse it, you dishonor us. You dishonor what you did for us that night. Arthur's eyes were wet. He looked at the money, then at the 400 faces watching him. He saw respect there. Brotherhood. Family. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Say you'll take it, Cole replied. Say you'll keep the farm. Say you'll let us come visit sometimes. Drink your coffee. Maybe help with the harvest. Arthur wiped his eyes, not caring that everyone could see. You want to help with the harvest, Tank grinned. Hell yeah, I grew up on a farm in Nebraska. Been too long since I worked with my hands making something instead of breaking something. I can fix that tractor you've got rusting in the barn, another biker offered. I used to be a carpenter, said a third. That porch could use some work. Arthur looked at them, all these rough men offering to work his land, fix his home, be his family. The family he'd lost when Sarah died. The family he'd thought was gone forever. All right, he said, his voice breaking. All right, I'll take it. Thank you, all of you, thank you. The bikers erupted in cheers, 400 voices raised in triumph. The sound echoed off the mountains loud enough to be heard in Redemption 5 miles away. But they weren't done. 3 days later, Arthur sat in the office of Rebecca Torres, attorney at law, in Billings, Montana. The office was small but professional, the walls lined with law books and framed diplomas. Rebecca herself was 38, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She'd driven down from Billings after Cole had called her, intrigued by what he'd told her about Caldwell. Now she sat across from Arthur, several thick folders spread across her desk, her expression grim. Mr. Brennan, she said, I need to show you something. She opened the first folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, legal documents, photographs. Marcus Caldwell has been running this scam across Montana for 3 years. You're not his first victim. You're his 12th. Arthur leaned forward, studying the documents. Faces stared back at him from the photographs. Elderly men and women, all with the same haunted expression he'd seen in his own mirror. James Peterson, 74, lost his ranch outside Great Falls, died of a heart attack 3 months after eviction. Rebecca's finger moved to the next photo. Dorothy and Harold Sinclair, married 60 years, lost their farm near Missoula. Harold died in a car accident 2 weeks before the foreclosure hearing. She continued through the files, each one a small tragedy. Families destroyed, lives ruined. Some had died. Others had disappeared, broken by the loss of everything they'd built. Caldwell has a pattern, Rebecca said. He identifies properties with elderly owners who have medical debt. He works with corrupt officials at First National Bank to accelerate foreclosure proceedings. If the owners resist, he makes their lives hell. Property damage, anonymous complaints to county inspectors, and if that doesn't work, she pulled out another file. This one contained police reports, accident investigations. 4 deaths in 3 years, all ruled accidents. But the pattern is clear: 2 car accidents with cut brake lines that were never properly investigated. 1 house fire that started mysteriously in the electrical system. 1 fall down the stairs that witnesses say looked more like a push. Arthur felt cold. He tried to kill me. Your truck's brake line? Rebecca nodded. That fits his pattern perfectly. You're lucky you're a mechanic. Most of his victims weren't. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Rebecca's expression darkened. Because he's protected. His father is Senator Edward Caldwell. Marcus has connections everywhere: judges, bank officials, county, assessors, even some state police. He's been untouchable. Has been. Arthur caught the past tense. Rebecca smiled for the first time, and it was predatory. Your biker friends are very resourceful, Mr. Brennan. They've spent the last week gathering evidence I've been trying to collect for 2 years. Financial records, email correspondence, witness statements, physical evidence. They hacked his computers, interviewed his victims, traced his money. She pulled out a thumb drive. Everything's on here, enough to bury Caldwell and everyone who helped him. Fraud, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder. We're talking federal charges, 25 to life if he's convicted. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your evidence, and your willingness to go public. Caldwell will fight this with everything he has. It won't be easy. Arthur thought of Sarah, of the farm, of the 11 other families who'd lost everything. When do we start? Rebecca's smile widened. We already have. I filed the lawsuit this morning. Federal prosecutors are reviewing the evidence. And I've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Brennan, you should know this is going to get ugly. Caldwell will come after you. He'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe worse. Arthur thought of 400 motorcycles, of Cole's promise, of Tank's grin. Let him try. But Caldwell moved faster than any of them expected. That night, Arthur was woken by the sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his shotgun and ran downstairs in time to see flames licking up the kitchen curtains. Molotov cocktail through the window. Classic intimidation tactic. Arthur grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink and put out the flames before they could spread. The damage was minimal: some burned curtains, scorched walls, broken glass. But the message was clear. Back off, or next time you burn. Arthur called the sheriff. Warren came out, personally took statements, photographed the evidence. But they both knew nothing would come of it. No witnesses, no proof. The next morning, Arthur found his water well had been poisoned. Someone had dumped chemicals down it overnight. The water ran brown and stank of chlorine. Testing would take weeks. Until then, he had no water. That afternoon, his mailbox was destroyed, run over by a truck that left no identifying marks. The attacks were petty, irritating, designed to wear him down, to make him scared, to make him withdraw the lawsuit and disappear quietly. They had the opposite effect. Arthur called Cole. It started, he said simply. We know. We've been watching. Tank saw the truck that hit your mailbox. We got plates. Can you trace them? Already did. Registered to a shell company owned by Caldwell's security firm. Cole paused. Arthur, this is going to escalate. He's trying to scare you off. When that doesn't work, he'll get serious. I'm not backing down. Didn't think you would. That's why we're moving in. What? We bought the property next to yours. 15 acres. Closed yesterday. We're building a clubhouse, but until it's done, we're camping on your land. Starting tonight. Caldwell wants to get to you. He'll have to go through us. That evening, Arthur watched as 20 motorcycles rolled into his driveway. The bikers set up tents in his north field, started campfires, established a perimeter. Tank himself moved into Arthur's barn. "Hope you don't mind the company," Pop's Tank said, setting up a cot next to Rosie's pen. "I thought you bought your own land." "We did, but that's for the clubhouse. Right now, you need protection, and we're providing it." Arthur didn't argue. Truth was having them there made him feel safer than he had in months. The next attack came 3 days later. Arthur was in town giving his deposition to Rebecca and the federal prosecutors. Tank and Doc were with him, unofficial bodyguards. The meeting took 4 hours, going through every detail of the foreclosure, the intimidation, the attacks. While they were gone, someone tried to burn the barn. The bikers camping on the property saw the flames start, saw the 2 men in ski masks running from the scene. They chased them down before they could reach their truck. By the time Arthur got home, the fire was out, minimal damage, thanks to quick response, and the 2 arsonists were tied to a fence post, their faces bloody, their truck impounded by Sheriff Warren. Their hired muscle from Billings, Warren told Arthur. "They're not talking, but we found $15,000 in cash in their truck. Payment for the job. Can you trace it to Caldwell?" "Not directly, but it's a start." The would-be arsonists were charged with arson, trespassing, and assault. Their lawyer, paid for by Caldwell, everyone assumed got them out on bail within 24 hours. But the message was sent both ways. Arthur wasn't alone, and attacking him had consequences. Caldwell changed tactics. If he couldn't intimidate Arthur, he'd destroy him legally. A blizzard of lawsuits followed. Caldwell sued for defamation, for harassment, for unlawful assembly. He got friendly judges to issue temporary restraining orders limiting how many bikers could be on Arthur's property. The legal bills started piling up. Rebecca was working pro bono, but court costs, filing fees, and expert witnesses cost money. Money Arthur didn't have, even with the farm debt paid. The Iron Brotherhood covered it. Every filing fee, every expert, every cost. Doc kept a running ledger, treating it like club business. "We're invested now, Pops," he said when Arthur protested. "This is bigger than just you. Caldwell has hurt a lot of people. Taking him down is good for everyone." The press conference happened in late April. Rebecca held it on the steps of the federal courthouse in Helena, with Arthur standing beside her, flanked by Doc and Tank. News cameras from every major station in Montana were there. National outlets, too. This story had legs. Corrupt developer, elderly veteran motorcycle club vigilantes. It was catnip for journalists. Rebecca laid it all out. The evidence, the pattern, the victims. She named names: Caldwell, Judge Morrison, bank officials. She held up the thumb drive. "Everything is here, and copies have been sent to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The conspiracy to defraud elderly Montanans ends today." Arthur gave a brief statement. Simple, direct. "I'm an 80-year-old man who almost lost everything to a corrupt system. But I'm still here, and I'm going to make sure Marcus Caldwell answers for what he's done. Not just to me, but to the 11 families before me. Justice delayed isn't justice denied, not anymore." The press ate it up. By that evening, the story was on every news channel in the state. By the next morning, it had gone national. The pressure on Caldwell was immense. His business partners started distancing themselves. His bank froze lines of credit, worried about liability. Even his father, the senator, issued a statement saying Marcus was on his own in this matter. But Caldwell wasn't done. 2 weeks after the press conference, Rebecca Torres was driving home from her office when a pickup truck ran her off the highway. Her car rolled 3 times before coming to rest in a ditch. She was alive barely, but in critical condition. Broken ribs, punctured lung, severe head trauma. The doctors put her in a medically induced coma. The truck that hit her was never found. No witnesses, no cameras on that stretch of highway. But everyone knew. Arthur visited her in the hospital, stood by her bed watching the machines breathe for her. He held her hand. She was unconscious, wouldn't know and made a promise. I'm going to finish this. For you. For all of them. When he left the hospital, Tank was waiting in the parking lot. Cole wants to see you, Tank said. All of us. Tonight. Club business. They rode to the property the bikers had bought, where construction on the clubhouse had already begun. The building was half finished, but the main hall was usable. Inside, over 100 bikers had gathered, all the local chapters, representatives from allied clubs across 5 states. Cole stood at the head of the room, his expression grim. Rebecca Torres is in a coma because she stood up for Arthur, he said without preamble. Because she tried to bring down a corrupt system. Caldwell did this. We all know it. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Arthur stood. Nothing illegal. We do this the right way or we're no better than him. The right way got Rebecca put in a hospital, someone said from the back. The right way is the only way that lasts, Arthur replied. You want revenge? I get it. But revenge doesn't change the system. Justice does. We have the evidence. We have the support. We finish what Rebecca started, legally, properly, so it sticks. Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Arthur's right. We do this clean. But his voice hardened. We also make damn sure Caldwell doesn't hurt anyone else while we're waiting for the law to catch up. From now on, nobody connected to this case goes anywhere alone. We watch each other. We protect each other. And if Caldwell or his people make one more move, we respond. Legal and hard. The room erupted in agreement. Over the next 3 weeks, the Iron Brotherhood became Arthur's shadow. Anywhere he went, he had escorts. His property was under 24-hour guard. The bikers who weren't on watch duty worked the farm planting crops, fixing equipment, preparing for harvest. The farm started to look alive again. The fields that had lain fallow were planted with wheat. The barn got a new roof. The house got repairs it had needed for years. Even Rosie got a new pen with actual functioning gates. Arthur protested at first, but Tank shut him down. Your family, Pops. This is what family does. The legal case moved forward. Federal prosecutors, galvanized by the attack on Rebecca and the media attention, fast-tracked their investigation. They subpoenaed bank records, email servers, phone records. They brought in forensic accountants. What they found was staggering. Caldwell hadn't just been running foreclosure scams. He'd been laundering money through his development company. Illegal campaign contributions, bribes to public officials, tax evasion on a massive scale. The foreclosure scheme was just one piece of a much larger criminal enterprise. Judge Patricia Morrison was arrested first. The evidence of her taking bribes was overwhelming: wire transfers, emails, even recordings. She was disbarred immediately and faced federal corruption charges. Then came the bank officials. 3 vice presidents at First National Bank, all involved in the scheme. They'd been falsifying documents, accelerating foreclosures, splitting profits with Caldwell. The dominoes started falling. By early May, federal prosecutors had built a case against Caldwell that was bulletproof. 47 federal counts: fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, money laundering. If convicted on all counts, he faced life in prison. On May 12th, FBI agents raided Caldwell's office in Helena, his home in Big Sky, and his construction company headquarters. They seized computers, files, records. They froze his bank accounts. Marcus Caldwell was arrested that afternoon in front of news cameras, led away in handcuffs while screaming about his rights and his lawyers. His bail hearing was 3 days later. The prosecutor argued he was a flight risk. He had offshore accounts connections in countries without extradition. The judge agreed. Bail denied. Caldwell would wait for his trial in federal detention. Arthur watched the news coverage from his living room, surrounded by bikers who'd become his family. When they showed Caldwell being led away in an orange jumpsuit, the room erupted in cheers. But Arthur didn't cheer. He thought of the 11 families before him, of Rebecca still in a coma, of Sarah who would never see justice done. It's not over, he said quietly. Cole, sitting beside him, nodded. Not until he's convicted. Not until everyone he hurt gets restitution. Not until the system is fixed so this can't happen again. That's a tall order. That's what Rebecca was working on before Cole stopped. That's what we're working on now. The lawsuit she filed before the accident, we're pursuing it. Class action. All 12 families. We've got lawyers lined up. That'll take years. Good things usually do. Cole looked at Arthur. You in it for the long haul, old man? Arthur smiled. At my age, the long haul might not be that long, but yeah, I'm in it. 3 weeks later, Rebecca Torres woke up. Arthur was there when she opened her eyes, sitting by her hospital bed with a terrible coffee from the cafeteria. Her eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused, then found his face. Did we win? Her voice was barely a whisper, raw from the breathing tube. Arthur smiled, tears streaming down his face. We're winning. Caldwell's in jail. His whole operation is falling apart. And you're awake. That's the biggest win of all. Rebecca's hand found his, her grip weak but determined. Then let's finish it. And they did. The trial of Marcus Caldwell began in September and lasted 6 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors brought in victim after victim, elderly men and women who'd lost everything. They showed emails where Caldwell joked about clearing out the old folks. They played recordings of him instructing his people to make it hurt. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all 47 counts. Sentencing came in November. The judge, a federal appointee with no connection to Caldwell, showed no mercy. Mr. Caldwell, you preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society. You used the law as a weapon. You destroyed lives for profit. You showed no remorse, no empathy, no humanity. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Marcus Caldwell, 45 years old, would be 70 before he saw freedom again, if he lived that long. The civil lawsuit settled in December. The bank, facing its own criminal liability, agreed to a $30 million settlement to be divided among Caldwell's 12 victims. Arthur's share was $2.5 million. He gave most of it away to the Methodist Church, to veterans organizations, to a scholarship fund Rebecca had set up for rural Montana students. He kept enough to ensure the farm would survive, that he'd never be hungry again, that he could hire help when he needed it. The rest went to fixing the damage Caldwell had caused. On a cold Saturday in mid-December, exactly 1 year after the blizzard, Arthur stood on his porch watching the Iron Brotherhood raise the frame for their new clubhouse. The building was beautiful timber and stone designed to fit the Montana landscape. It would have a meeting hall, a garage for motorcycle repairs, a community center open to the town, and office space for Rebecca's Legal Aid Foundation. Tank was directing the construction, his voice booming across the property. Doc was arguing with the electrician about wiring. Cole was reviewing blueprints with the architect. And everywhere bikers worked, hammering, sawing, carrying, building, creating something permanent. Arthur's phone rang, the regular one, not the burner he'd finally thrown away after Cole had programmed his number into Arthur's real phone. Hello, Mr. Brennan. This is Dr. Patterson from Billings Memorial. I'm calling about Rebecca Torres. Arthur's heart clenched. Is she? She's fine. Better than fine, actually. She's been released. Full recovery. She wanted me to call you, tell you she'll be by tomorrow to go over the final settlement papers. Arthur closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Thank you, doctor. Thank you. He hung up and stood there for a moment watching his farm, his saved farm bustling with activity. The fields would be harvested in the spring. The barn was solid. The house was warm. He wasn't alone anymore. Pop's Tank called from the construction site. You gonna stand there all day, or you gonna come tell us where you want the memorial garden? The memorial garden. They decided to dedicate part of the clubhouse grounds to all the victims of predatory foreclosure. A place to remember, to honor, to ensure it never happened again. Sarah would be listed there, and the 11 others who'd lost everything. Arthur walked down from the porch, his boots crunching in the December snow, toward his family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was always another fight, another wrong to right, But today was for building, for hope, for family. And Arthur Brennan, 81 years old and still standing, couldn't think of a better way to spend it. As summer turned to fall, life on the farm settled into new rhythms. Arthur hired two young veterans to help with the work. Men who needed purpose, needed healing, needed family. They lived in the renovated bunkhouse Tank had built, worked the fields, and slowly started to heal. The clubhouse became a community center exactly as they had envisioned. Local kids came for after-school programs. Veterans gathered for support groups. The town of Redemption, initially skeptical of having a biker clubhouse nearby, had embraced it completely. Tank's Garage sponsored a Little League team. Doc taught free motorcycle safety courses. The women of the club ran a food bank. The Iron Brotherhood had become part of the community's fabric. In October, Arthur's doctor gave him news he'd been expecting, but dreading. His heart was failing. Congestive heart failure, probably caused by the strain of that night in the blizzard, though the doctor was too polite to say it. Maybe a year left, probably less. Can you fix it, Arthur asked. At your age with your history, surgery would kill you. We can manage symptoms, keep you comfortable. But I'm dying. We're all dying, Mr. Brennan. You're just on a faster timeline than most. Arthur took the news calmly. He had lived 81 years, most of them good. He'd loved deeply, fought hard, made a difference. What more could a man ask? He didn't tell anyone at first. Didn't want the pity, the hovering, the sadness. But Tank figured it out when he found Arthur's pills, the new prescriptions for heart failure. How long? Tank asked quietly. Doctor says maybe a year. Tank sat down heavily on the porch step, his big frame shaking. Pops, there has to be something. There isn't, and that's okay. Arthur put a hand on Tank's shoulder. I've had a good run, son, better than I deserved. This last year especially, finding you boys saving the farm, seeing justice done. That's more than most men get. What do you need? Arthur thought about it. I need to make sure the farm continues, that it stays in good hands, that it keeps being what it's become, a place of healing, of family. Over the next weeks, Arthur worked with Rebecca to set up a trust. The farm would be owned by the Iron Brotherhood, held in perpetuity as a community center and veteran support facility. The wheat fields would be worked by veterans who needed jobs. Profits would fund the Sarah Brennan Foundation. It would never be sold, never be developed, never be lost to foreclosure. Arthur's legacy would be permanent. He told the others about his diagnosis in November, gathered them all in the clubhouse on a cold Saturday morning. Cole took it hard, his face going pale. There has to be treatment. Experimental stuff. We'll pay for it. There's nothing, Cole. And I wouldn't want it if there was. I'm 81. I've lived a full life. I'm ready. We're not ready to lose you, Arthur smiled. You're not losing me. I'll be right here. In the land, in the clubhouse, in everything we built together. I'm not going anywhere that matters. They spent the day telling stories, making plans, saying things that needed to be said before time ran out. Doc cried, which Arthur had never seen. Tank got angry, then sad, then quietly accepting. The younger bikers looked lost. Many of them had found father figures in the club, and Arthur had become the grandfather they'd never had. I need you all to promise me something, Arthur said as evening fell. When I'm gone, keep this going. Keep helping people. Keep being family to those who need it. Don't let my dying slow down the good work we started. We promise, Pops. Cole said, his voice rough. We promise. Winter came early that year, snow falling in mid-November. Arthur's health declined steadily, but not dramatically. He had good days and bad days. On good days, he worked the farm, visited the clubhouse, sat on his porch watching the mountains. On bad days, he stayed in bed, his breath labored, his heart struggling. Tank moved into the farmhouse, permanently sleeping in the guest room, making sure Arthur was never alone. Doc checked his vitals daily. The others visited constantly, bringing food stories, presents. On December 12th, exactly 2 years after the blizzard, Arthur woke feeling better than he had in weeks. His mind was clear, his breathing easier. He knew what this meant, the body's last rally before the end, a final gift of clarity. He got dressed, made coffee, and called everyone to the farm. They came quickly, all 19 of the original crew plus dozens more. By noon, the farmhouse was packed with bikers, the porch overflowing, people standing in the yard despite the cold. Arthur sat in his rocking chair wrapped in blankets and talked. He told them about Korea, about the cold that never left your bones, about brothers lost. He told them about meeting Sarah, about building the farm, about 43 years of love. He told them about the foreclosure, the fear, the despair. And he told them about the blizzard. I heard your engines dying in that storm, he said, his voice soft but clear. I knew who you were. Everyone in Redemption knew about the Iron Brotherhood, outlaws, criminals, dangerous men. I should have stayed inside, should have called the sheriff, let nature take its course, but Sarah wouldn't have. Sarah would have helped. So I did. And you know what? It was the best decision I ever made after marrying her. He looked around at the faces watching him, hard men with soft eyes, tough women with tears on their cheeks. You saved me right back. Not just the farm me. You gave me family when I was alone, purpose when I was lost, hope when I was drowning in despair. You made my last years my best years. Cole stepped forward. Pops, you don't have to. Yeah, I do, because I need you to understand. That blizzard that night, it wasn't an accident. It was grace. It was Sarah's last gift to me, sending me a family to love. And I have loved you, all of you. You're my sons, my daughters, my legacy. He pulled out a box from beside his chair. Inside were 19 patches custom made. Each one had the biker's name and one word, family. I want you to wear these, to remember that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's choice. And I chose you. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. That night, Arthur went to bed feeling peaceful. Tank sat with him reading aloud from a Louis L'Amour Western, Arthur's favorite. Around midnight, Arthur's breathing changed. Tank called Doc, who came immediately. It's time, Doc said quietly. They called the others. Within 20 minutes, the farmhouse was full. All 19 of the original crew surrounded Arthur's bed, holding vigil. Arthur drifted in and out of consciousness. Once he opened his eyes and smiled. Sarah, he whispered. No, Pops, Cole said gently. It's us. We're here, I know. But she's here too. Can you see her? She's smiling. They couldn't see her, but they believed he could. At 2:47 in the morning, Arthur Brennan took his last breath. It was gentle, peaceful, like falling asleep. His face relaxed into a slight smile. Tank checked his pulse, then looked at Doc, who shook his head. He's gone. The room was silent except for the sound of grown men crying. They buried Arthur 3 days later in the memorial garden next to Sarah's name. Over 2,000 people attended, the entire Iron Brotherhood, citizens of Redemption, the 12 families he'd helped save veterans from across Montana. Sheriff Warren gave the eulogy. Arthur Brennan was the best man I ever knew. He didn't just talk about helping people, he did it, even when it cost him everything, especially then. He showed us that one person can make a difference. That goodness still matters. That family is what we make it. Rebecca spoke next. Arthur gave me back my purpose when I'd lost it. He showed me that justice is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. He saved more than farms, he saved souls. Cole spoke last. 2 years ago, 19 of us were dying in a blizzard. This man, this 80-year-old man who owed us nothing, dragged us one by one to safety. He gave us warmth, food, shelter. He gave us his winter stores knowing he'd go hungry later. He gave us everything. His voice broke. We thought we were paying him back by saving his farm. But that wasn't the debt. The debt was that he showed us what we could be. Not outlaws, not criminals, but family, brothers, men who help those in need no matter the cost. Arthur Brennan made us better, and we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to deserve what he gave us. They lowered Arthur's casket into the ground next to where Sarah's name was carved. Someone had already added Arthur's name below hers with the dates in one line. He saved strangers and called them family. As the crowd dispersed, Tank stayed behind. He stood alone at the grave, this massive man who'd been saved from a blizzard and found a father. "We'll keep the promise, Pops," he said quietly. "We'll keep helping people. Keep being family. Keep making you proud." The wind whispered through the wheat fields, carrying his words away into the Montana sky. 1 year later, the second annual Iron Brotherhood Family Day was bigger than the first. Over 3,000 people attended. The farm was thriving, worked by a crew of 8 veterans who lived in the expanded bunkhouse. The Sarah Brennan Foundation had helped 42 families avoid foreclosure. The clubhouse hosted community events twice a week. Rebecca had expanded her legal practice to 4 cities. She'd won 3 major cases against predatory lenders, setting precedents that made such schemes harder to pull off. Marcus Caldwell's co-conspirators had all been convicted. Judge Morrison was serving 12 years. The bank executives got 15 each. The whole corrupt network had been dismantled. Tank stood on the stage looking out at the crowd. "We gather here to remember Arthur Brennan, who taught us that family isn't about blood, it's about showing up when people need you, about doing the right thing even when it's hard, about never giving up even when you're facing impossible odds." He gestured to the memorial garden where Arthur and Sarah's names were carved in stone. "Pops isn't really gone. He's in every family we help, every veteran we hire, every kid who comes to our after-school program. He's in the wheat growing in these fields, the roof over our heads, the purpose in our hearts." The crowd was silent, listening. 2 years ago, 19 of us should have died in a blizzard. One man decided we were worth saving. He dragged us to safety, fed us from his own winter stores, and asked nothing in return. Then when we tried to repay him, he turned it into something bigger. A movement, a family, a legacy. Tank's voice grew stronger. "Arthur Brennan showed us that you're never too old to make a difference, never too broken to heal, never too alone to find family. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives proving he was right." The crowd erupted in applause. Later that evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, the original 19 gathered at Arthur's grave. They did this every year now on the anniversary of his death. They brought beer, told stories, remembered. Cole poured a beer on the ground, the old ritual. "To Pops, still teaching us, still guiding us, still loved." "To Pops," they echoed. Doc spoke next. "You know what I realize? Arthur didn't save us in that blizzard. I mean, yeah, he literally saved our lives. But the real saving came after. He showed us we could be more than what the world expected, more than outlaws. We could be healers, helpers, family. He gave us permission to be good," Tank added. "And damn, it feels better than anything we'd been before." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. The farmhouse glowed with warm, light veterans inside preparing dinner. Laughing, living. The clubhouse buzzed with activity, a community meeting about expanding the food bank. Everything Arthur had built was thriving. "You think he knew?" one of the younger bikers asked. "That helping us would turn into all this?" Cole smiled. "Nah, he just saw men who needed help and helped them. Everything else, that was just Arthur being Arthur. Doing the right thing and letting the consequences sort themselves out." "Best kind of man," Tank said quietly. "The best," they all agreed. As they sat there, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of wheat and pine and fresh earth. It rustled through the memorial garden, through the growing crops, through the lives they'd all built in this place. And if you listened carefully in that wind, you could almost hear it, an old man's laugh, warm and approving. Sarah's voice joining in. The sound of family, the kind that transcends death and time, and everything that tries to tear people apart. The Iron Brotherhood had learned a truth that night in the blizzard, a truth they'd carry forever. Family isn't about blood, it's about showing up, about sacrifice, about seeing someone in need and saying, "Not on my watch." Arthur Brennan had lived that truth, and in doing so, he created something that would outlast him by generations, a family bound not by genetics, but by gratitude, purpose, and love. The wheat fields whispered in the darkness. The mountains stood eternal. And in the memorial garden, two names carved in stone rested side by side, united in death as they'd been in life. Arthur and Sarah Brennan, beloved, remembered, forever home. The stars came out over Montana, bright and endless, and the Iron Brotherhood sat vigil through the night, protecting, honoring, continuing the work of one stubborn old man who'd looked at dying outlaws and seen sons. And somewhere beyond the stars, Arthur Brennan smiled. His work was done. His family would carry it forward. He could rest now beside Sarah, knowing their farm would never be lost again. Home, family, legacy, forever.